Hey everybody, Andy Cavernan here with another Cornerstone Connection Daily Devotional. Hey, I wonder, have you ever been in a conversation with somebody in a crisis situation and as you enter in, the tension's already high and you need to communicate something back and forth, but you realize the next thing you say could set off a landmine, not only in that conversation, but in your relationship? Communicating in crisis is hard, isn't it? How do we avoid communicating in crisis in a way that causes landmines to go off? How do we avoid landmines when we're communicating in crisis? Well, I think the Apostle Paul speaks into this. We've been in the book of Ephesians as a church here recently, and I want to draw our attention back to Ephesians chapter 4. And in verse 15, Paul says, rather, speaking the truth in love, we're to grow up in every way into Him who is the head, into Christ. Speaking the truth in love. Now, as we stop and think about those two concepts, speaking the truth and loving people, in many ways they seem antithetical to one another, don't they? They seem to be running in opposite directions. How do I tell the truth to somebody? How do I be honest about what I'm feeling or about what I see in them? And at the same time, how do I love them in a way that builds them up? Well, the Apostle Paul expands on this in the latter part of chapter 4. And in verse 25, he says something that I think is very important. He says, therefore, having put away falsehood, let each one of you speak the truth with his neighbor, for we are members of one another. Paul says we're to speak the truth. We're to be honest, in other words. There is no relationship that can flourish, that can function well without honesty. If we're telling lies to each other, our relationships are ruined. We can't function. Honesty is the foundation, is the basis for healthy relationships. But we all know we can be honest and we can be mean at the same time. We can be corrupting. We can tear others down. Well, Paul continues this theme in verse 29, and he says this. He says, let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up, as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear. Paul says, don't let any corrupting talk come out of your mouth, but only do what gives grace to the other person. Speak what ingraces God to another person. Build them up. In other words, be honest, but add value. Don't detract. Don't corrupt from that other person. Add value to them. Build them up. How do we do that? Well, I want to share with you a device that's been helpful for me over the years as I've applied it in my own life and as I've coached others in how to communicate, and it's this. Express desire and not demand. When you're communicating with somebody, hold out that which you desire. Hey, I need to be honest about this. I'd love it if in this situation we could act differently, if we could go this way. What do you think? That's expressing desire. Hey, I need to address something in your life that I'm seeing, and I wonder, are you willing to talk about that with me? Can I share it with you? That's expressing desire. Now, the opposite of that is expressing demand. Hey, we need to address this right now, and you need to do what I say or else. That's demand. Hey, you've got a problem in your life and you need to deal with it right now. That's demand. They're totally different approaches to the same problem. And when we express desire, what do? We put that person in a position of dignity to respond with the dignity that they have, to say, you know what, yeah, you're right. I think I do need to do this. I need to address this. When we express demand, what do we do to that person? We put them in a position of losing either way. Either they're going to submit to our harsh demand, or they're going to fight back, and then the landmine goes off and everybody loses. When we express desire over demand, here's what we do. We leave space for God to work in that person, and in fact, to work in us, to work in me, that we come to God's solution to the problem and not simply one person's over the other. Now, there's lots of different ways to apply it, but it's helpful as we think in terms of relating with other people to communicate desire over demand. That helps us to speak the truth in love. And friends, that is so imperative for these days. We've got to communicate. We've got to find ways to communicate truth in love as we're facing this crisis together. Let's work toward that end. Amen. To God be the glory.